You are listening to the Fly the W670 podcast. It is episode 89 of season number 3. Jed Hoyer at the GM meetings. Don't forget to listen, download, review, and most importantly, subscribe to the podcast. Follow on all the socials. Fly the W670, Twitter, Instagram. Of course, we're on Facebook, and you can email Crawly and I at flythew670@gmail.com. All right, Crawly, the general manager meetings are down in San Antonio, Texas, and Jed Hoyer and all the executives and the super agent Scott Boras are down there exchanging ideas.
Yep, everything's bigger than Texas other than Cubs contract offers, right? So when we talk about what happens in GM meetings, you know, there's a couple of things that happen. They like to discuss rule changes and policies. They come up with recommendations for the Joint Competition Committee. Obviously, you know, we've had a lot of rule changes in the last few years in the game. They take a look at, they go to different seminars where they talk about like television contracts, revenue sharing, new technologies, international markets. Obviously, we know the Cubs are going to be starting in Japan this year. And so there's just so much that they do there. But the real thing that kind of starts to happen is it's really the first time where everybody's all together, right? The executives from the clubs, the agents, the beat writers. So a lot of what happens is like the groundwork for later on trades or, different free agent acquisitions kind of starts to happen here. It's where everyone kind of starts really kind of feeling each other out. So with Hoyer, Boras, and the Cubs beat writers all there, 670 The Score was able to get some great audio from San Antonio. So, we kind of divided this up into a couple different sections. The first section that we're going to talk about has to do with what Jed has to say about the current team and what it looks like going into 2025. And obviously the biggest thing that we found out recently is Cody Bellinger opts in. And so this is how Jed feels that it's going to affect the offseason.
Most of this gives us clarity. I think now we know what our roster looks like, and now we can go about building the team. So I think before that there was some uncertainty, and now it adds clarity. And spend the next 4 days talking to teams and talking to agents and getting a feel for the market.
So, if they were waiting for Cody Bellinger, then obviously, there was two pathways. We talked about that on the last episode. This pathway, they now know that Cody's part of the team, so you don't have to – there's not much we talked about that you could do to really address hitting. It's mostly going to be pitching. It's going to be relief pitchers and starters and definitely improving on the bench, right? You can definitely get some better bench play. So hopefully that's what's going to happen. Now, Scott Boras was there, and he had his own thoughts on Cody Bellinger.
What went into Bellinger's decision to pick up the player option?
I think, he's very, very happy with his situation and his contract. I think last year he got nicked for a few days running into a wall and doing things like that. And, he felt that because of his age, because of his contract, that he just kind of wanted a comfortable platform to go out and put together another season before he considered free agency again.
Yeah, that's really spinning a story. That if Cody Bellinger had another great year like he did in 2023, he would be out the door, right?
Out the door. Without a shadow of a doubt.
So it wasn't the year he was looking at. He did bring up he got banged up early, those ribs, colliding into a wall and whatnot. But yeah, he didn't have the year he wanted. I know Ian Happ's happy. I know Dansby and other teammates are happy. But, I think if Cody, and I'm sure Cody Bellinger's fine still being here, but, he wants that big contract. And again, he's going to give it another shot this season. And again, if he has a successful 2025, which we all are hoping he does, he's out the door because he has another opt-out in 2026.
Yep. So, I think it's good for both sides at this point. Listen, the 25, how many, and maybe not, homework assignment. Okay. How many $25 million a year players do the Yankees, the Dodgers, the Mets, how many of those do they have? More than one, right?
Right, I'd say easily 3 to 4 each.
Okay, right. And the Cubs have how many?
Not many. We're talking about
one. They have one guy one player making $25 or more million a year in a single year. Cody Bellinger, right? Cody Bellinger's the highest paid player. Shota's not a $25 million a year pitcher. He might be someday, but he's not right now, right? There's no 20. Seiya Suzuki's a $18 million, $17 million a year player, right?
How much does Dansby get a year?
19, 20. But I'm just saying, it's not. They don't have multiple $25 million players. So I mean, I just think it's something that's important, that he should not throw a complete wrench in what their offseason plan is.
No, I mean, you would hope not. I mean, you'd hope that the team would be willing to spend the money, but I'm not sure. Obviously, with Cody Bellinger staying in, I think it's pretty obvious that they're going to keep that lineup that we talked about, that phenomenal defensive lineup with Happ in left, three-time Gold Glover, PCA, who, again, I'm still livid that he did not even get put as a finalist, much less not win it. And then I think it's going to be a better year defensively for Bellinger, because it's hard to play right field at Wrigley, and he didn't have a lot of experience, learning how to play the bounces, and there's other little things here. But then that means the odd man out is Seiya, and this is what Jed had to say about Seiya Suzuki and his role.
It was premature on that. But yeah, I thought Seiya did a great job when he was DHing. We didn't have injuries down the stretch, but I think anytime you just have depth at a bunch of positions, you lose an outfielder, and all of a sudden having the ability to slot a guy like that in is really nice. But Seiya had a great year. I think he was top 10 in the National League in OPS. Obviously, Cody's our best defensive right fielder, but certainly I think Seiya is solid and it has room to improve.
So we already mentioned that Seiya Suzuki right now is going to be a Gold Glover. And so Seiya Suzuki is nominated for being a Silver Slugger, right? And we talked about his defensive deficiencies. The other thing, Dustin, that I always think about is that, Seiya's a guy that has these weird injuries that happen, right? I think if he is not in the field, he's less likely to get injured. And so I think that's another thing. If you can keep Seiya Suzuki healthy all year at DH, I think that's going to be a benefit.
Well, it sure can't help. I mean, it can't hurt to have him in a position where he's going to know what he's doing on a day in and day out basis. And I would suspect every once in a while they'll want to get Cody off of his feet, right? They'll want to get him off of his feet. Maybe they do a little swap on a getaway day or something like that.
Maybe you just go with your fourth outfielder, if that's Mike Tauchman or whoever. It's something you can look at. But so now we have the outfield set. We got the DH. A lot of questions have been going around about Michael Busch, and I think out of all the positions, that first base, second base thing, especially with, thoughts about Nico Horner being traded or something, and everyone was talking, is Michael Busch maybe going to slide over and play second? Well, Jed Hoyer answered this question in San Antonio.
Might a little bit, but ultimately I think I want him to focus on first base. I thought he got better and better and better and better, and I thought certainly the second half of the season, I thought he was Gold Glove quality. I mean, I think if Christian Walker is in the American League, I think he's winning a Gold Glove, and really other than April when he was getting still reacclimated at first, I thought he was fantastic. So I think he's a weapon over there, and I do think when you have someone over there that's really good, it provides comfort for your infielders. I think you can position a little bit differently because he's able to get so far off the line. I think it makes a big difference.
Like you guys would be tempted in spring as Nico's working back to put him in second, or
yeah, I mean maybe because we now know he can play first. Right. He doesn't have to work on it. He can move around a little bit, but I mean the expectation is that he's playing first.
I said it in last week's episode, or the last episode we had, that I thought that, or maybe it was a couple episodes ago, I thought that Michael Busch has a chance to be a Gold Glover next year. And I agree with Jed on that if Christian Walker's in the AL, the way that especially the way he played, see, the first half is what your first impressions of Michael Busch at first defensively were like, not so great here. And then all of a sudden, every single month, better and better and better. And to me, by the end, you're talking August, September, he was making phenomenal picks, phenomenal stretches, just looked really, really good at first. And again, for a team that struggled with guys at third, with Nico having that injury that caused him to not be able to throw as well, I thought he was a huge asset defensively, and I think he's only going to get better offensively.
I agree that he got better. There's no doubt. He got better each and every day. So that was another good thing. He got better.
And so we moved from first to the other corner spot. Isaac Paredes didn't necessarily have, didn't have what the Cubs were looking for as far as you were hoping, with trying to make a run like they were at the end, that Isaac would give you a little bit more. And the question was, okay, well, what was going on with Isaac? And so here's Jed on Isaac Paredes.
When a guy has a really good track record and does it on the road, I feel like it wasn't as if you look at what he did with the Cubs and it was blanket negative. I mean, actually, like on the road, he was a really good player. He was sort of, he probably even better than the player that we expected. So, I just expect him to come in and play well. He has a track record. He's a really good hitter. He controls his own. So that's what I expect.
Now, when you take a look at it, yeah.
Well, wouldn't the breaking news have been if he said, what else? Here's the thing about some of this stuff is what do you expect him to say, right? What did you expect Jed Hoyer to say there?
More than anything for me, when I was looking at things, it was more like, okay, how did he look at home versus how did he look at the road? And just at Wrigley Field, it was just absolutely atrocious. He was just awful. And on the road, he was really bad. And multiple times, Scott Boras brought it up with Cody Bellinger. I know that Jed Hoyer's brought it up. Those guys have all talked about the weird weather patterns at Wrigley. You know what? Let's see what happens next year. Let's look at the offensive numbers and see how much of a role the weather did.
How do you build a team to go against the Wrigley Field weather? How do you do that?
Well, you have to be able to have guys that can do multiple things. You have to have guys that can hit the homers. You have to be able to bunt. You have to be able to play small ball. You can't just like tailor your park in a one-dimensional way. You have to be able to have multiple guys that can do multiple things. If all you're going to have guys do is slug, you're going to struggle in April, May, and sometimes in September. We've seen it all the time when the wind's blowing in and when it's cold. And like I said, last year, how many balls did we see just for whatever reason die at the warning track? It was forever. It was ridiculous. And so I don't know how much of a, like I said, I want to find somebody that can explain it to me. Maybe Tom Skilling. I know he's retired. Maybe we can find him and just and get old Tom Skilling out here to kind of explain what happened. I don't know. I am just curious to see, looking at the numbers at the end of 2025, if that weather is still a factor or not. Now, Dustin, the one spot that we know the Cubs need to upgrade is catcher, and Jed says they're talking to Christian Bethancourt. Here's Jed on Christian.
Yeah, Christian played great for us, and obviously I think he was a lot of fun to watch, and certainly a guy that we'll probably have conversations with.
I think if Christian Bethancourt is the backup catcher next year, I'm going to be very disappointed in the offseason.
Yeah, but again, I think backup catcher right now is not super high on my priority list. I mean, he was okay. I think he was better than we thought he was going to be.
He had a good couple weeks. And I just think when you're talking about improving, right? We're talking about getting a starter. We're talking about getting some relievers, including lefties, and you're talking about improving your bench and a backup catcher. That's all you have. Everything else is kind of taken up. So no, I don't want to be just okay. I'm
more worried about the starting and adding another starting pitcher and rebuilding a bullpen. That's kind of top of the food chain for me as far as what the priority should be this offseason.
See, for me, you always want, if you're talking about an A starting pitcher, of course you always want that. When I'm looking at things from a perspective of the bullpen is number one. That was a disaster that has to get fixed. But I think there are guys out there that if you can use to be catchers that can, I think, better than Christian Bethancourt. That's all I'm saying is improve the bench.
You can upgrade. Listen, absolutely, you can upgrade. No doubt about it.
Now, the question that's being brought up too is about Nico, about his injury, when he's going to come back.
Right? Yeah, his arm.
Yeah,
everybody's gonna,
But what I heard from Jed, this was interesting, is what he talked about when he talked about second place.
I don't know if there's any ripple effects. I mean, I think it's a position that we have some depth in the minor leagues with, guys like Shaw and Triantos. but certainly, with Nico, unclear on timeline, but I don't think there's any ripple effects to this injury.
So I think, I think the plan is if Nico's not ready to go, my guess is it's going to be either Shaw or Triantos, probably Shaw. We've had all the minor league broadcasters on there, including Mick Gillespie from Tennessee and Alex Cohen from Iowa. We've heard them all talk, and I think there's a consensus that, you'll get more power out of Shaw. As far as James Triantos is concerned, he's very much a similar player like Nico that's going to spray the ball around. Neither of them are as good as Nico defensively. But I do think they're going to go with young guys rather than move Michael Busch over to second.
This is season 3, episode 89 of the Fly the W670 podcast. Jed Hoyer at the GM meetings. Don't forget to listen, download, review, and leave us a 5-star review and subscribe. That's most importantly to the podcast. You can email Crawly and I, flythew670@gmail.com, and you can watch us. Oh, yeah. You can watch us on the Score YouTube page. In this segment, Crawly's talking to former Cub and White Sox pitcher Dennis Lamp about his 7 years playing for both sides of town in 16 seasons in the bigs. Some of the legendary managers he played under, memorable moments in his career as Dennis comes back to sign autographs for fans at the Chicago Card Show in Bridgeview this Sunday afternoon.
Joining me now on the Fly the W podcast, I am happy to have on Dennis Lamp, former Major League pitcher for 16 seasons, 7 of those in Chicago. Dennis, how you doing?
Great. It's so nice to see the new stuff, the new memorabilia and stuff from the Cubs, Eddie Vedder and everybody's winning. And that's great. It's just great to be in Chicago. I think it's the only city where people actually go home and then look forward to coming back into the city at night, especially on the weekends. And I've always enjoyed it when I was at Wrigley Field. In fact, my first time I was there, I had to start. And I was on the L, and I got off, and then I went into the Wrigley Field. I'm walking across the field, and Eddie Vedder's there. And he comes up to me. He says, "Are you the organist?" I said, "No, I'm the starting pitcher."
Wow, a young Eddie Vedder, huh? That's
Yeah.
That would be around the time period that he would have been at Wrigley Field. That is pretty amazing. And, you've been playing, you were like I said, 16 years in the big leagues. How did you get into baseball? Did you play a lot as a kid, or did you have a favorite team growing up?
You know what? I had 2 older brothers, and my dad was from Brooklyn. So it was easy. He was the tryout manager in the Valley in North Hollywood. And they built a field from scratch, and he loved it. And then my uncle, who used to play at LA State, and he was on the same card as Casey Jones and Bill Russell, and USF was undefeated back then. And he said, "Hey, this is a team you got to watch." And sure enough, they ended up being teammates. But yeah, that's how I started. I started out as a bat boy, and I was 7. But I was always included. I think that helped a lot. My brothers always put me at a higher level as far as pickup games and that. And I learned a lot from them. And then my dad always was playing catch with us in California. Plus, we had the great weather instead of throwing snowballs, right?
Right. And you said your dad was from Brooklyn. Did he stay a Dodgers fan after they moved out to LA?
That's what he said. They moved when they went out in 47. Said the Dodgers followed me. And and the one I remember was the 59 World Series. I forgot what grade I was in, but I was at St. Patrick's and right near Burbank Airport, and we had a Father Bauer, and I said to him, "What's the score?" He said, "It's 11-0." I didn't think, he was telling the truth. I said, "It's in the 4th inning," but anyway, it's 2 hours difference. I didn't realize I was at lunch, and White Sox were already ahead 11-0. I think that's how it ended, and then the Charlie Neal hitting that beer can on Al Smith's face, things like that we remember as kids. And we would go to Sears. We went to Sears in North Hollywood, and they had all the Willies, Willie Mays, Willie Kirkland, and Willie McCovey. And the next week they had, Gil Hodges, Norm Larker, and Duke Snyder, and everybody just kind of gravitated to the idea that they have a new franchise, basically from Brooklyn, and it's starting out here in Southern California.
Well, that's great. And so when you were a senior, I was looking at the numbers. You struck out 127 batters. You only allowed 48 hits in 94 innings. And, the person that really kind of saw you was Gene Hanley. And for those people that don't know, he was a scout for the Cubs for 56 years. And
I know.
Unbelievable that a legendary talent saw you. I mean, what did you think when you saw Gene, and what was Gene telling you the whole time?
Well, my dad always kept telling me, he says, the Cubs seem to be the most interest in you, have shown the most interest. He says there's a scout there, Gene Hanley, and Bud Pritchard was also with him. And Gene Hanley said to my dad, we knew he could play pro ball because I pitched so much at my senior year. He said he thought that going into the minor leagues wouldn't affect me. And he pretty much was right. I was always pitching. It seemed like my first year, I had Fred Martin as a pitching coach in rookie league, and I was striking out a batter, but I was also walking a batter. The ball was moving all over the place. So Fred brought me to Bradenton, and that's when I met Bruce Sutter. And there's a story behind Bruce where he hurt his arm, and then he had his own surgery in February, and he showed Fred Martin. He says, "You're not paying for this." And then they had him on a bus to go to Quincy, and Vidi Himsel said, "Hey, when you get there, can you send him back to Mount Joy? I've got his release papers." And Walt Dixon never gave him his release papers. So wow. The rest is history. He says, "You got a spot for him." And then, that's one of the great stories. All of a sudden he should have been out of baseball, and he ends up being in the Hall of Fame. When he was on a team, I think, reminiscent of the White Sox this year, we were 37 and 94, and we never won more than 2 games in a row. And Donnie Moore, I think, had a winning record, and I was like 1-6, and Suter was 0-6 with the 0.66 ERA. They still have some of those stats. I think I picked them up the other day, and it's really interesting. Kruko was on that team, and a number of guys, Joe Wallace, and you look back and thinking, God, we thought we were never going to make it. We were in Key West, Florida, so bad, and we'd go to the park with sand from the beach, and then we were thinking, oh God, we're not going to make it. This might be our last year because we were so bad. We were 60 games out of first place.
Oh my gosh. Well, you were drafted by the Cubs in the 3rd round in 1971. And like you said, you kind of went through, you were in Idaho, you were in Bradenton, Quincy, Midland, Texas, AAA, Wichita Arrows. And so when you look at that, though, it was in 77. You had a good record going, good ERA, and the Cubs traded Steve Renko to the White Sox on August 18th, 1977 for Larry Anderson. You're called up to replace Renko. And so you make your debut on August 21st, 1977 against, of all teams, your Dodgers, right?
Dodgers, I know. Yeah, that was so cool. My first at bat, I got a base hit. And then the second at bat, I got a base hit. And Steve Garvey says, in the offseason, I might need some instructions. Can you help me out? And then after the game, Lou Fonseca, the hitting instructor, and I know used to do the Major League Baseball World Series games back in the day when they used to record all those games. And he was a big part with his voice, but he was the hitting instructor for the Cubs, Giants, and Reds. And he says to me, I like the way you spread out your at bat, because when I got the second hit, you can see him behind home plate turn to somebody. It was kind of funny. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, he says, I saw you there. So anyway, I gave up a home run to Rick Rhoden. That was my first home run was to a pitcher. And then I saw a clip of the Phillies the other day when they clinched at Wrigley. I gave up a grand slam to Larry Christensen. So that means the first 2 home runs I gave up were to pitchers.
Oh no. And the funny thing is when I'm looking here at the box score of that first game you pitched in, all the ties to the Cubs later on. Ron Say, obviously, Steve Garvey broke our hearts in '84. Rick Monday
Yes.
was a former center fielder. Dusty Baker was later on the manager of the Cubs, and Johnny Oates did some coaching for the Cubs. What do you remember most about that first game at Wrigley Field?
Well, the first thing I remember, it was a rain delay. And all I said to God is, hey, I don't care if I win or lose, but we got to get this game in. Because my dad was back in L.A. watching the game. And even the priest from St. Hedwig says, oh, he's going to be pitching tonight, today. And I was thinking, I just hope this game gets in. And it was great. I mean, I had my cousins there, and my dad's sister ended up going, the McIntyres and the Millers, and they're up in Wisconsin, the Millers, and it was great. I mean, it really, really was a great feeling to at least get that game under my belt.
Now, when you got to Wrigley, was it Yosh Kawano that gave you your number?
Yeah, that's a great story that you just mentioned. I lived in Los Alamitos. Andy Messerschmidt was my neighbor. Like, they could walk there from my house, the townhouses. So anyway, I was watching TV and I noticed in spring training I had 41, and 41 was Dave Roberts. So I was pitching my best baseball in Wichita. I won 11 out of 12. So I called Bob Kennedy. He was in the booth, and I said, Bob, I'm pitching my best. Best of my life. Is there any chance? He said, sit tight. I'm going to make a trade. So anyway, they gave me 47, which was Andy Messerschmidt's number. And his mom says, I noticed he's wearing 47, which is kind of cool. My little brother came over back then, Brian. He's in the 60s now. It's kind of funny how time flies.
Yeah. And you really, that first year, you pitched well. You didn't get the run support you were looking on, but you were named the Rookie of the Year by the Chicago Baseball Writers Association.
Yes.
So you get out to that good start. And then in June 9th, 1978, you throw a one-hitter. You also did that for the Sox. When you're in that situation and nobody's getting any hits, and you were a sinker baller, right?
Yes.
That was your pitch there. Do you realize while the game's going on that you have a no-hitter going?
Yes, pretty much. Once it got to the sixth inning, I was really aware of it. And I remember that game because I remember Dave Kingman made two great plays at the end of the game. I remember seeing that on Mel Allen, This Week in Baseball. And Dave Kingman made two great catches coming in and back as short and then catching it and preserving the one hitter. And I think I got Oscar Gamble out, a ground ball to Bittner, and he flipped me the ball, and that was it. So,
yeah, you don't really remember Dave Kingman for his defense, but it was, like I said, twice you threw a one hitter. Who taught you the sinker pitch?
Fred Martin taught me the sinker pitch, and that's why I spent a couple of years in the minors. My ball was moved. I was cross seam in high school, but they said the only way you're going to survive at Wrigley is to throw with the seams. And then they kind of put me in ballparks, Midland, Texas. It was windy all the time, and you pitched in ballparks, and then Wichita was 312 to right field, and then like 318 to the other side of the scoreboard in right field. But it was like 430 to center. But it was really weird how I was always in small ballparks. Plus, when I was going through that stage, I was involved in, what was it, 6 shutout. I got shut out 6 times, and then I had 3 shutouts myself. And the last one was in San Francisco. My dad was listening to the game at Dodger Stadium, and Vince Scully says, it's the bottom of the 9th. There's 2 outs. It's 1-0, and Terry Whitfield has hit a fly ball to right, and they turn the lights out and candles. The Dennis lamp goes all the way to win 1-0, and
Nice.
And the Dodgers went into first place. My dad reminded me that after that, because the Giants had Montefusco and all those guys doing so well, they were really keeping up with the Dodgers, and it was really really nerve-wracking for my dad. He said, God, the Giants all of a sudden out of nowhere, they've got all these guys that are just producing. Plus, when you mentioned that I was pitching in the shutouts, someone made a good comment to me, not to get discouraged. He says, one thing you can't do is control the other pitcher.
Right.
And that kind of sunk in. I was kind of like, I remember who was the Notre Dame quarterback? Receiver, Samardzian.
Jeff Samardzija, yeah.
Yeah, that one year I was thought, God, this guy's going through what I went through. He'd have like 6 stars. He only got like 1 or 2 runs. And I said to myself, God, if I ever saw him, I'd say, one thing you can't do is control the other pitcher, and
Right.
not to get discouraged.
Now, even though you had all those great games, you also pitched in one of the most famous games in Wrigley history. You were the starter on May 17th, 1979 against the Phillies. When you pulled up to the ballpark that day, you talked about the winds in Texas and stuff like that. What was it like pulling up to Wrigley that day and the winds howling like they were?
It was like there was a helicopter right in second base and in right field and in left field. And it just, I threw a couple of pitches to the plate. Instead of sinking, it rose. And then Bo was hitting the ball over shortstop. And then Kingman thinks he can catch it. And he comes in to try to shoestring, and it goes by him. And then the only claim to fame was the only guy I got out was Pete Rose. And I gave up. I only got 1 out and 6 runs. But, Keith Moreland one time, to a friend of mine, called me one day and says, I was there at that 23-22 game. I didn't play that day. I said, well, at least I would have gotten 2 outs.
Yeah, I mean, that is a legendary game. It was Mike Schmidt hit a couple home runs. He homered off you in the first, and then he homered off Bruce Sutter in the top of the 10th. 23-22. I mean, that was just Kingman had 3 home runs that game. It was.
Oh, I know. Kids were coming out of off the porch trying to catch it down the Waveland Avenue. And what was it? Oh, I was listening to the talk show, and some fan calls up and says, how come they didn't walk Mike Schmidt? And I forgot who it was. It might have been Vince Lloyd or Lou Boudreau. Says that was the 50th hit. You know what I mean? I think he hit it over the camera box. I think it was. He hit 60 home runs at Wrigley.
He was a Cub killer. Whew, absolutely brutal. Now, near the end of spring training in 1981, you get traded to the White Sox for left-hander Ken Kravik. That was not a great deal for the Cubs, getting rid of, should have kept you. But, change of scenery. And so you moved from the north side to the south side. But you were part of that 1983 win and ugly White Sox team that made it to the ALCS. But your role was as more of like a swingman. You were starting, coming out of the pen. Whose idea was it to use you in that role as
Tony La Russa came up to me and he says, I'm going to prolong your career, but I want you to do something for me. I want you to start middle relief and once in a while close. And he was a prophet, basically. But Tony always was well aware of what you were doing or pitching, and he didn't want to overdo it. But he would always pitch me against the Tigers. I was 11-1, and then he'd have Jerry Koosman pitch against the Yankees or the A's or the heavy left-hand hitting teams. And at that time, when we were starting, I remember there was a game that Drysdale and Harrelson said, I thought Denny would win 20 games this year. But then I told somebody, well, Koosman won 11 and I won 11, filling in that 5th starter. So it's just the way things work out.
You look at your career and you had some really incredible managers. You had Herman Franks for the Cubs, Tony La Russa with the White Sox, and Bobby Cox with the Blue Jays. What is it about certain managers that really kind of seem to get the most out of their players?
They like using the whole team, the bench. Even Jimmy Leland, when I played for him, we're in Pittsburgh, they always developed players because they weren't playing all the time either. So they were always in the game thinking as to what they would do if they were managing or keeping you well aware of what was going on during the game. And, Tony was great because, sometimes there would be situations where, somebody's pitching well and he'll say, I want to leave Koosman in. He's into the 9th inning, only has 81 pitches, but he was well aware of, the way he wanted to use the pitching staff. And that was one of the strengths he had. He and Sparky Anderson, I think, were pretty much the two, and Chuck Tanner they used their bullpen the most. And now it's kind of, it's history. I mean, and it's like the Bible that they have nowadays, especially with the Dodgers. I mean, they were bullpen by committee, and La Russa started that. But Sparky was doing it, and it really, I thought at that time, oh God, it's going to be funny how guys are going to get wins who only pitch 6 innings. And then what was the other thing I was trying to think of? The victories and that, and how they worked it. But I lost my train of thought, but it was the way to go and everything, because of the way the teams were structured. And Bobby, with the DH, they would switch pitchers, and then he would have Al Oliver off the bench hit, and then he would take Garth Orge out or someone else. But Bobby always had a great way of using his team. In fact, I got to tell you a story. There was a guy, Matusik, who not Matusik, it was Willie Aikens, and he had gotten word that you're not to play Willie. You're going to release him after the game. So we're in Texas. It's the bottom of the ninth and 2 outs. And Willie Aikens hits a pinch hit home run to tie it. And he says after the game, "This is the hardest thing I could ever do as a manager." But we all respected it because we knew that Bobby wanted to win. He didn't care that they say don't play him because we're going to release him. But he put the game first. That's how it should be played.
Well, I got to ask you. I'm gonna give you some teammates. You tell me, if you got a couple memories on some of these guys. These are some of the great 70s, 80s Cubs that you got a chance to play with. What was it like playing with Billy Buckner?
Oh, Billy was really a tough guy. I mean, he really had problems with his ankles and that, but he always seemed to be prepared all the time. He always was in the clubhouse icing them or stretching, and he always took pride in the fact that he could play every day. And he was started out as an outfielder with Walter Alston, and then he came to the Cubs, and he had a staph infection in spring training. It was pretty scary, but he ended up having one of his best years, and then he finally won the batting title. He won it on the last day in Pittsburgh, and God, it was great. It's just sad he passed away so young, and but he was a great teammate. I had him with the with the Red Sox. He was my teammate there, and you look back at how time flies, and the guys you're with, at the time you don't realize, how great they are and how dedicated they are to the game.
Well, one of the guys that was your teammate in Boston was a rookie, Lee Smith, and he ended up being a Hall of Famer. When you first met Lee, I mean, did you know right away that he was going to be a Hall of Famer as a young kid?
I got to tell you a funny story. When he got called up from Wichita to come to the clubhouse, well, I knew him in spring training. I mean, instructional league. He didn't have any shoes, so I had a whole army bag full of shoes because I had 13s. And Lee, I said, "Oh, I'm not going to wear these. I only wear the Adidas." So anyway, he went through there. He was able to have it because he had the Wichita shoes. They were red. They were, the Wichita franchise had red uniforms, so it was kind of funny. But what's amazing to me with the Cubs in '80, Lee Smith, Bill Cottle, Willie Hernandez, Bruce Sutter, they were all on that team.
Yeah,
I mean, that is, yeah. And then, I mean, it's just to this day, I'm thinking all those guys were in All-Star games and 2 MVPs, and Lee finally made it to the Hall of Fame. Plus, I think Lee and Bruce, they had it tough because they had to go 7 outs a lot of times, and that's hard to do. And I think nowadays it's just 3 and done. But I think Whitey Herzog knew that Bruce had pitched a lot and had a lot of wear and tear. So he had him down to like 19 pitches. So he always started him in the 9th inning. And that saved his career. But then he broke down. That pitch was so unbelievable.
Now, we talked a little bit about Dave Kingman. Do you remember the biggest blast you remember seeing Kingman hit?
The biggest one was in that 23-22 game. I mean, that went past that rooftop of what says WGN, and the kids are running out into the street, and it's over their heads. I mean, and I was down 16-6, and it was 22-22 after 7 innings. So I remember looking out in that little what was that door that leads to the clubhouse? And I'm going, you got to be kidding me. I thought for sure I was done. I wasn't going to get a win. And it was 23-23 in the seventh inning. And then they brought Tug McGraw in. And speaking of Buckner, they brought Tug McGraw in the fifth inning, and Buckner hit a grand slam off Tug McGraw. It was hilarious. Yeah.
Now, one guy that was, became really famous in the 60s and 70s through 2 no-hitters, Kenny Holtzman. Now, obviously, that's kind of more towards the end of his career, but what was Kenny Holtzman able to teach you?
Oh, you know what? He and Mike Krukow, he would pick Mike Krukow and I up, and he would just tell us stories after story about some of the things he went through as the A's. And one of the funny lines, I think Jerry Royce picked it up. The writer went up to Kenny Holtzman, and, hey, Kenny, $500 for a mustache. He said, I'd grow hair on my palms for $500. But he was great. He always was encouraging. And he was, from Chicago and that. And I think he started out in St. Louis area, but it was great. And he was in the service for a while there, he told me, and he was like 7-0. And he went up to John Holland and he says, John, if I didn't pitch on the weekends, I would have won 20 games. And he said, John Holland threw an ashtray at him. Negotiate.
Now, one of the guys that I think is underrated as far as Cubs pitchers is Big Daddy Rick Russell. I mean,
oh my God, yeah.
An intimidating presence on that mound.
He was the best athlete. I mean, we used to pinch run him, but you couldn't bunt on him. And I noticed at the end when he was in San Francisco, he would always stay in the close games, would come out of the games where we had a 5-run lead. And I kind of respected that, looking at what he did. And he had surgery at one point, and he told me, he said, after the surgery, I said I had a better breaking ball. But he was great. You know what? And I have to tell you a funny story. I'm up my first year, right after that game I started and lost to the Dodgers. I'm in relief, and Steve Henderson is up, and Swisher's catching. It's first and second. They want to see if he's bunting. So he flips his thumb towards his inner leg. In AAA, that means to drill the guy. And this one, I was supposed to come set and back off. So I come set and drill him. And I thought, oh, my God, that's the end of the world. So then the next guy, Joel Youngblood, cleared the bases. So the next day, Rick Russell come up to me and says, when you hit that guy yesterday, Herman says you're supposed to back off. But then Herman says, I kind of like that about Dennis to do that. It was, you know what I mean? Here you thought you were messed up. He said he kind of liked that. It was kind of funny how that happens. And then even the umpire says to DeJesus, hey, what's this? What would he try to? He was supposed to back off the mound, not throw at him. Yeah.
Well, you're going to have plenty of stories for the fans this weekend. You are coming back to Chicago on November 10th, the Chicago Card Show at the Bridgeview Community Center. That's going to be this Sunday from 11 a.m. to 12:30, brought to us by the Chicagoland Sports Appearance Connection, our friends at CSAC. How excited are you to come back to Chicago and talk to the fans?
It's great. If I'm not mistaken, Mark told me I was there 15 years ago, and I had a blast. So I'm kind of looking forward to it. And I think my fan club president, Noreen, they were noted as the Chicago Cubs with fan club presidents. She's going to be there, and hopefully I get a few relatives to come out. But it's Saturday and then gone Sunday. So I'm hoping next time I come into town, it's a little bit longer visit. But yeah, I always enjoy it. I mean, the fans, I think at Wrigley and the Cubs, they're more forgiving. I mean, in Boston, it was tough. Bob Stanley, every time he'd come out to the bullpen, some guy goes, "Hey, Steamer, I'm tired of booing you." He goes, "Do you have a brother? Because I'm tired of booing your ass." You know what I mean? It was like Stanley was always, the fans were on him, but the fans were always forgiving. That's the best thing about Wrigley Field. And, and when I played, I loved the fact I got up, pitched, and then, made the drive back be home by 4 or 6 o'clock. And there was something to that. But then they went to the lights. When I was in Pittsburgh, I remember Steve Stone said anything different. And, being it was a day game, it didn't dawn on me. And I said, oh, yeah, the lights and that. So, and it's fantastic. I mean, all the bleachers across the street and the fans. And I just couldn't believe it when I went back, how in awe I was. It's such a small park, but there's just so much to it. And most of the fans that I've known from Boston, they kind of think that Wrigley is so unique. It's got the ivy, and it's the middle of the it's like middle of the town, right there in the neighborhood.
Yeah, right in the middle of the residential neighborhood, and it's I've heard it said many times that every ball player should play at Wrigley at least once in their career, and I agree 100%. Now, if fans want to get tickets in advance, they can go to www.csac.biz. That's www.csac.biz, or just show up to the Bridgeview Community Center. I've been there for signings numerous times. It's a lot of fun. This Sunday, November 10th, from 11 a.m. to 12:30. Dennis, thanks for jumping on, and we are all looking forward for you to coming back to Chicago and meeting with the fans.
Well, thanks so much, Paul. It's great. And Mark said you're going to like him. He's a great interviewer, and you're one of the best by far. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Dennis, and you take care, bud.
You too. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
You are listening to episode 89 of season number 3 of the Fly the W670 podcast. Jed Hoyer at the GM meetings. Feel free to leave us a 5-star review. All right, Crawly, time to round the bases, a little news from baseball, and we also need to officially say goodbye to an old friend.
Yep. First up, 670 The Score Marquee Network beat reporter Bruce Levine tweeted out that Kyle Hendricks was close to signing a deal with the Angels. That deal was finalized yesterday. 1 year, $2.5 million. You know that Hendricks used to work at the ticket office for the Angels?
I did not know that.
So he's going home. They have a really young staff in Anaheim, a lot of good young pitchers coming up. And so Hendricks would be a perfect number 5, but a guy that, how this, I've seen Kyle in spring training. Young guys love going up and talking to him. And he is, again, this is why I think he might be a pitching coach one day, but he's somebody that is really great to bounce ideas off of, to talk with young players. I think it's a great move for Anaheim. I think Kyle's happy to be going home. I think we're really going to miss him here, both as a pitcher and as a person. But I think he still wants to play baseball. And unfortunately, there's really no spot for him here with the Cubs. This is the type of team you thought he would go to, someone that wasn't going to be a competitor, but had young pitching that he could be a positive influence on.
Yeah, good luck to him. No doubt about that. You're not going to hear me say anything negative about him right now.
Now, I put a list, Dustin, I heard the Mully and Haw show this morning and you guys talking about it. I put my top 3 Kyle Hendricks moments. I wrote them down. I was at 2 of the 3. The other I was listening to while I was driving on 670 The Score with Pat and Ron. And then I had to go watch the game after I heard it because it was so amazing. May 3rd, 2019, Kyle throws a Maddox. On May 3rd, 2019, Kyle not only threw a complete game shutout in the Cubs win over the Cardinals, he threw a Maddox. If you don't know what a Maddox is, it is a complete game with less than 100 pitches thrown. He only needed 81 pitches to get the job done. Gave up 4 singles, picked off a runner at first, didn't walk a batter, and struck out 3. It was the first Cubs Maddox since Zambrano did it in 2009, and only John Lieber did it in fewer pitches, 78 against the Reds on May 4th, 2001. Kyle's shutout took only 2 hours and 28 minutes, but that was just a master class. If you got a young kid and you want to teach him how to pitch, put that video in, because that was just unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the moments that you're picking out here, Crawly, are fantastic. I think you can argue amongst them a little bit, but let's so that was number 3. What's your number 2?
Kyle Hendricks gets the ball in Game 7 of the World Series. In what was the biggest game in Cubs history, the 27-year-old Hendricks pitched 4 2/3 innings, gave up 2 runs, only one of them earned, and one of those runs came in after he had already left the game on an error by David Ross. He gave up 4 hits, 1 walk, and 2 Ks. The Cubs were leading 5-1 in the 5th. Hendricks got the first 2 outs, but he walked Carlos Santana on what I thought was a bad call by home plate ump Sam Holbrook. Joe Madden decided to pull Kyle so that John Lester, a lefty, could face Jason Kipnis. So, Kyle Hendricks was warming up in the bullpen. He's not a guy who's accustomed to that. And so that unfortunately, if he would have gotten the strikeout as a 3-2 call on Santana, that was called a walk. If he would have gotten that strikeout, then it would have been a clean inning starting out for Lester the next inning. I don't think that was a bad move by Joe Madden. I know people are going to disagree with that, but I've heard Joe talk about it, and Joe to this day really believes it was the right move. And so that's that. But I thought in a game, can you imagine the pressure, Dustin? That was one of the most watched World Series in the last 20 years. Game 7 with history on the line. And Kyle always pitched like he had ice in his veins, right?
Right. Absolutely. And I think a lot of people, I mean, maybe not people that do what you and I do, like host a podcast about the Cubs, but even Cub fans, people that are really good Cub fans, I bet if you ask them who started Game 7, they'd have to think about it for a little bit. I think they remember John Lester coming out of the bullpen. I think they can tell you who was on the mound when the Cubs got the last out. I think they can tell you that the closer, who basically had been untouchable, melted down a little bit in a big moment and the game got tied. But I think they forget that Kyle Hendricks took the ball to start Game 7.
Well, I know a lot of Cub fans have, to this day, hold a grudge against Joe Madden for pulling them what they thought was early. And if you listen to Joe talk about it, and I'll see if I can dig up that clip. I have clips of it, but it was, in my opinion, it was the right move.
Right. And at this point, it doesn't matter because they won the damn game.
I thought whoever was the manager when the Cubs won the World Series would have the biggest statue in Wrigleyville, and people were so critical afterwards, it never made sense.
Basically, in spite of him.
Right.
If you ask the masses, they won in spite of him. In spite of him.
Ridiculous. Ridiculous.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there were mistakes. There were mistakes and things you'd scratch your head about, but definitely not in spite of him.
No. My number one Hendricks moment, Game 6 of the NLCS. I was at that game. That was the game I was at with a chance to punch the ticket for the Fall Classic for the first time since 1945. Hendricks went 7 1/3 shutout innings. He gave up 2 singles. He picked off one of those guys, 0 walks, 6 strikeouts. I mean, it was just a masterclass performance by Kyle Hendricks. Outpitched Clayton Kershaw, Mr. First Ballot Hall of Famer. It was, and like I said, between him and Aroldis Chapman, 27 up, 27 down. Just one of the most well-pitched games and one of the biggest moments in Cubs history. That was, again, Game 7, huge, but Kyle was nowhere near as dominant as he was that night against the Dodgers.
Yeah, great selection, obviously. And just to add, though, into that, this year when he did make his, what I think everybody knew was going to be his final appearance at Wrigley as a Cub, and Tommy Hotovy taking him out, that was a cool moment. It had nothing to do with his performance, but it's an image and a moment that I won't soon forget about Kyle Hendricks.
You put that up there with Kerry Wood's last strikeout when his son came out and gave him the hug. And there's certain times where Joe Madden came out to the mound to take out David Ross. There's certain last moments that you're always going to remember, and that's definitely one of them.
All right, a little news. Our buddy Willson Contreras down in St. Louis is getting the tools of ignorance taken away from him. He is moving positions.
Yeah, how about that? We find out in the winter meetings that Willson Contreras is moving to first base. Dustin, it is chaos in the armpit of America that we call St. Louis. As far as that team is concerned, there's a lot of mess going on.
Wow, armpit of America. That's pretty strong.
Did I say that out loud? I might have to re-edit that.
I just repeated it, yeah.
I think the funny thing is that the Cardinals are in a mess, and they're trying to figure this out. They're trying to see who's going to waive their no-trade clauses, and Willson is not. He has a no-trade clause. He is not going to waive it. I don't know if they really want him at first. I don't know if they're trying to push him out because Willson takes a lot of pride in his catching. He really, it is a big deal to him. They tried changing some things up, and in doing so, he moved a little bit closer to the plate, and he got hit by a swing and shattered his arm. Here's the thing, though, Dustin. 2 things. that Cub fans should keep in mind. If he's moving to first, guess who's not going to be there anymore?
Yep.
Noted Cub killer Paul Goldschmidt.
Well, couldn't he be the DH?
I think they're trying to cut salary, Dustin. I don't think Paul Goldschmidt.
I mean, I'm fine with it. I'm just saying. I'm fine with it. I'm just saying.
Yeah. The other thing is that they constantly, you remember right before he came to Wrigley, they pulled catching duties from him. It's clear, Dustin, that they do not want him catching. They spent $87.5 million on a 5-year deal. This is Buster Olney writing this. It says St. Louis bought into his defense exactly 0 months. A monster mistake for a team restrained in its spending. That's Buster Olney on Willson Contreras. I said that, Dustin, when that happened. I was stunned that he went to St. Louis. I said it was going to be a bad fit. To sit there and follow up who St. Louis thinks is a legendary Cubs or a legendary catcher. And again, he was a good catcher. I'm not going to take that away from him. But in St. Louis, he's revered as a god, the greatest catcher that ever existed. This was not going to work. Willson was never known as a great defensive catcher, good arm, but that was a mistake. And to me, I take a look at that and I say to myself, wow, that did not work out well for anybody there other than Willson Contreras' bank account.
No, no, it didn't. No, it didn't, Crawly. One last nugget.
We're talking about, players and roster moves, but that's also true for the minor leaguers. And so the Cubs did make some moves. They were able to re-sign some important minor leaguers that, guys that I think are really, really good. They were able to sign Pablo Aliendo, catcher. He's been with a couple championship teams for High A, South Bend, and with Double A, Tennessee. Cole Franklin has been on the podcast, right-handed starting pitcher. Right-handed relief pitcher, Aaron Perry, catcher, Miguel Pabon. So that gives you a little bit of catching depth in the system. And right-handed starter pitcher, Antonio Santos, who had a great 2024 minor league. So just those guys in general, I'm glad to not lose those guys. You want depth in your system. It's going to give you depth. And to me, all those guys, especially when you talk about Franklin or you talk about Aaron Perry or Antonio Santos, those are guys that could really have breakout seasons that people may not see coming and contribute. I don't think Cole maybe next year, he's recovering from injury, but a couple of those guys can really contribute maybe even as soon as next season.
Very good, very good, very good. All right, Crawly, that is a wrap, right? That's a wrap of this one. Don't forget to download, review, subscribe to the Fly the W podcast. Follow on all the socials, Facebook, Instagram, X, and you can email us, flythew670@gmail.com, and watch us by subscribing to the 670 The Score YouTube channel. Crawly, enjoy the weekend, and obviously if something major happens, we will jump behind the microphones and deliver you guys a podcast.
Yes, sir, and let's just hope that Jed keeps cooking and trying to make this team better. Go Cubs! Hey guys, it's Crawly. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. If you want to see more of our videos, be sure to check out our playlist and let us know what you think in the comments below. Also, don't forget to follow us on social media to stay up to date with our latest episodes. Links are in the description. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Go Cubs!